Hello and welcome back to C's Listening Room. Got a blizzard on the way, lots of snow, low temps, a lot of ice. It's be pretty ugly out there, so what better day to make a video, right? I'm not going anywhere. I hate snow, I hate driving in it, and it's supposed to be particularly bad these next 2 days, so got plenty of time. I'm in the house. Might as well get going on a video, right? This is one that I should have done back around Halloween, but I didn't get around to it just because of the name and the logo. This is called Get Out of School from Old Skull. And you can see the O is in the shape of a skull, and if you look really carefully, you can see the word skull is made up of like bones. Very Halloween-like, very horror-like. Bones and skulls and all that fun stuff. And yes, that is what they look like. Those three kids there were the members of Old Skull. I believe they were about, I think one was 9 years old and I think the other two were 10. And that's kind of the intriguing part about it. I remember when I was about that age, my brother and I would make music too, but not like that. We didn't make anything that would be suitable for public consumption. We would get like a coffee can and bang on it like a drum, even though we had no sense of rhythm. And we would get like a shoebox and put rubber bands around it for strings, and we thought it was a makeshift guitar. But really, if you plunk around on rubber bands, they sound more like an unplugged bass. They don't really sound like guitar strings. It sounds like you're playing a bass. So we were bass players. We just didn't realize it at the time. We thought we were playing poverty guitars. But no, we were bass players. It just took us a long time to realize that. But we would basically go into my bedroom and look out the window and sing about whatever we saw going on outside or whatever. Just kind of really bad stuff. really bad stuff. Except one song that my brother came up with that my mom thought was brilliant. He's like, let's do a song called Tree Lower Down Your Branches. I'm like, that's great. He was like 6 years old at the time. And then my mom's like, where'd you come up with that idea? And it turned out it was from a Toyota commercial with the savings tree lowering down its branches and dropping a bunch of money. So we'd see something off of a TV commercial or something, and that would be our inspiration to sing about something with coffee can drums and shoebox basses. A little bit different in the case of Old Skull. I'm going to probably butcher the name, but it's a family project from the Toulon family, Toulon. A guy named Vern Toulon was, I guess, involved in the local punk scene, and he had musical instruments laying around the house. He gave his kids, his 9 and I think 10-year-old son, a couple little lessons, and then they teamed up with a neighborhood kid on drums. And because he was a musical family and they had instruments laying around, they had a lot better stuff at their disposal than my brother and I did at like 8 or 9 years old to play around with. So they had a little bit more to work with, and I guess you could say they were fortunate in that case. And there's some speculation that Vern actually ghost wrote some of these songs, because the first song is called Homeless. It's about the homeless crises, which is actually, I think, much worse now than it was in 1989, when this album was released. There's always been a homeless crisis, but I'm watching all these videos on YouTube and reading all these stories about how bad it's gotten. It's probably more of a relevant song now than it was in '89. It's probably more meaningful and hits closer to home, haha, no pun intended, than it did in '89. So they thought, some people think that was a little bit of an adult or grown-up theme to be singing about, and a 9-year-old really wouldn't have much to say about it. And then one of the tracks is called AIDS, about the AIDS crises, which was a big story in the late 80s, early 90s. It was a really big issue back then. And what would a 9 or 10-year-old know about that? Maybe not much, but that brought a lot of speculation that maybe these were ghost-written songs. I disagree. I don't think any of these were actually pre-written. My belief is that this was pretty much all improvised. Like they probably were in a basement or in a small studio, just banging out sounds on instruments and making stuff up as they went along. I think there was probably some influence, maybe some coaxing from the father, maybe saying, hey, why don't you sing a song about homelessness? Why don't you sing a song about the AIDS crises? And then they probably sing them from the perspective of a 9 or 10-year-old. I think that's probably a lot closer to what happened. There are lyrics printed inside the album, but I think they're more of a transcription than anything. Like they transcribed what the kids were saying. But it's basically a novelty hardcore punk band. I guess that's how it's been described, and I guess that's the best way to describe it. It's kind of hardcore punk. It's definitely novelty rock, but it's from the mind of kids. It could be good, could be bad. This is a hard one to review. This is a hard one to give a rating to, because there's two different aspects to it. There's the music, and then there's the theme, or the concept. The concept of two kids and a neighbor kid banging around on instruments in the basement, singing songs from their point of view, from a young, hyperactive, skateboarding kid male's point of view, from their mindset, is interesting. And it's definitely enough to make me, it was definitely enough to make me go out and buy the album. But because it was produced like a punk album, and because it's so authentic and sincere and realistic, it's kind of a hard listen. The production's very raw, very basic, very rudimentary. The guitarist sounds like he picked up a couple of techniques and just implemented them at any given moment. Not a lot of repetitive guitar riffs with what I remember. I listened to it again, and it just sounds like he's having fun playing around on the guitar. It doesn't really sound like he's trying to make a good rhythm or a melody or a song structure. The drummer sounded like he was trying. He was the one that was really putting in the most effort. There are some semblances of actual rhythms and beats going on in there. But it's mostly kids screaming about things that kids are interested in, at least young guys are interested in. And it's very hard to decipher the lyrics, so it's good that they transcribed them inside. I would say that it's probably influenced a lot by maybe action movies and video games. In fact, there's a song called Skate or Die. And I always associate that with a Nintendo game on the original NES, one of the early games, which came out about a year prior to this album's release. So the timeline adds up that might have been an influence, but Skate or Die apparently was also available even earlier on some other consoles. So it was a pretty well-established video game about skateboarding. And so I don't know if it was just a coincidental name or what, but I always thought it was influenced by video games. And that's one reason I think that this is kind of all kind of made up on the spot. Also, you got two songs about arson. And I mean, young guys sometimes have a thing with fire. I mean, they're young, they're full of energy, that kind of imagery. is kind of a release for them. And I think fire and all that, I'm not a psychologist, but I would just say I think there's something psychological where fire is some kind of a release, or it has to do with like this pent up energy that they have. But there's a there's a song called "The House Is on Fire," and there's another one later on called "Who Lit the House." So that's kind of, you got these kids singing about the same thing, one towards the beginning of the album, another song towards the end of the album. Kind of like that was a favorite theme of theirs, and they just kind of repeated it over and over. A song called James. I don't know if it's written about Jamie, but Jamie is one of the Toulon brothers that was in the band. But it's just basically insulting the guy. The entire song is James is stupid, he smells bad, he's ugly. That kind of humor or that kind of insult is typically considered very funny in that age group. So that's why I say it's very authentic. It's very sincere. It kind of captures the mindset of these kids. I don't know if they meant any harm by it, if they were trying to be mean, or if to them it was just funny. But I definitely think there's something about it that resonates more with their age group, and that's part of the novelty of it. I think adults would probably get a little tired of this very quickly. Listening to kids sing about stuff that's funny or cool to kids, a lot of probably action movie or video game influences and that kind of imagery and all that. It's cool to kids. It's cool to a 9-year-old. It's cool to a 10-year-old. Listening to him play guitar like a 10-year-old probably would grow very, very tiring after about 4 songs. I think the album's a bit long. It's a full-length album. I think the novelty really wears off way, way before the album ends. I also think it's funny. There's a song called Jesus Died on the Cross, and then there's one called Let's Go Kill That Man. So he's singing about Jesus, and then he's got a very violent song that's very unchristian. I mean, that's again, the mind of a kid. I don't think it's, as I say, I don't think any of it's intended to be harmful, but I think adults listening to it probably would get past the 4th song and say, okay, I can't deal with this anymore. This unintelligible screaming, this poor production, amateur guitar playing. And so I would probably say musically, I would rank this at about a 2. Conceptually, I think it's a 4. I think the concept and the idea of just letting kids be kids with real instruments is fascinating. I think the result is pretty spot on, even if maybe 2 or 3 of the song ideas may have been inspired by or pressured by the father. I still think it's pretty realistic. I think it's a great idea. I think it's cool that some kids at that age were able to have access to instruments and to play real instruments on their album. I think it's cool that they actually released an album. I typically like punk. I like this kind of music. But I wouldn't want to go back and listen to my tapes singing about the savings tree or whatever else my brother and I were singing about with fake drums and fake guitars. And real instruments are even harder to play. So if we take away the age of the kids and the novelty concept, it can be a challenge to listen to this even halfway through. But I don't want to give it a 2 because you've got to take their age and their lack of life experience and their lack of musical experience into consideration as well. So that it would be, but I don't want to give it a 4 because musically it's just not there. This is another one I'm going to have to give a 3 to, just as a compromise. it's a compromise between the two different aspects that you've got to kind of put together. There's no, I mean, it's basically hardcore punk that seems to have been made up on the spot, where the father is probably just pushing to record on a crude tape deck, and then the kids are just going at it. It's fascinating, but it grows old very quickly. And as I said, they go from intellectual ideas like an AIDS crisis. They talk about they sing about Jesus in the song, and then they talk about murder and arson. So it's kind of all over the place. Just like the guitar playing, the song, everything's all over the place. And I have listened to this album all the way through, but I don't know if I could do that now. It's a great conversation piece, and it's a very tragic story about the group. I believe one of the members, maybe the father, actually was homeless for a period of time. Both the brothers are deceased. The father's deceased. Vern passed away. Both the sons passed away. One of them, I know, was struggling pretty badly and died. I think the brother, about a year later, took his own life. And their mother passed away. So there will never be another old school album. There will not be a reunion. We won't be able to get anything else from them. We won't be able to hear a new perspective on them. I mean, it's not like they're going to be able to come out with a new album and let us hear what they're about now, because unfortunately everybody behind it except the drummer has died. Very sad story. And I think that makes the album even more interesting. Some of their childish mind was preserved on here from a young skateboarding or video game playing perspective. Very interesting conversation piece. What you think of it beyond that, all depends on how long you can listen to kids basically making stuff up on instruments and improvising as they go along. But it's definitely different, and I would say especially for 1989. This was really ahead of its time for 89, I'd say. I mean, there were always kids that played in bands, usually family bands, where you had the Osmonds, you had the Jacksons, but they were always really nicely produced, slick pop music with all these song doctors that could clean up the sound and make it really accessible to a mainstream audience. This is not accessible at all. This is not really accessible to any audience. And I mean, it was a very daring release. Cool in its own regard, but as I said, not without its shortcomings. So, a little late, but this is your Halloween special, Old Skull, with the skull and bones. This is C. This is another installment of the Listening Room. Thanks for stopping by. Keep warm. Catch you later. Bye.